Hey guys, welcome to GRA-152. This is your instructor, Nicholas Goebel. I'm really excited to be joining you guys this semester, and this is going to be our first assignment. We're going to do basically a nameplate with your name. You can choose either to do your first name, your last name, or a combination of both. But it's going to kind of give you a good introduction into Photoshop and seeing the differences between your last semester in Adobe Illustrator and kind of how we operate with photographs and images in Photoshop. You'll notice a lot of familiarities with placements of different panels. You'll notice a lot of different similarities with just a lot of the workflow from what you probably experienced last semester. And one of the coolest things is that once you get used to that Adobe workflow, a lot of Adobe software just kind of flows together and becomes easier and easier to learn. The big thing we're going to talk about this semester is the purpose of Photoshop and kind of the differences that we see and why we want to use Photoshop over Illustrator for different purposes. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Again, this is kind of a good way of me getting to one, know who you are, and two, you get to have a cool looking end assignment to start you off in the first week, and it's kind of easy to get your head wrapped around. So let's go ahead and jump in. This is my final product. I'm going to go ahead and close it, and we're going to start fresh. So the first thing you're going to want to do, right, is when you open up Photoshop, you're going to want to click New File. You're going to create a new file, and so the first thing you want to make sure of is change your increments into inches. We want to work in inches, and let's just start with a standard page. So we're going to do horizontal, and we're going to set it to the width of 11 inches. We're going to do a height of 8.5 inches. We're going to keep the resolution at 300 pixels per inch. We'll talk about this later on. You possibly talked about this during GRA-151 in Illustrator. It'll come back and we'll talk more about this definitely for sure. Those are the three big things we want to change, right? Is the size, the type of increments that we want, so inches instead of pixels, and then making sure, of course, resolution is set at 300 and orientation is set in the correct orientation. So I typically like starting my file off with the name at the beginning. So typically I would do first initial, last name, and then lettering assignment. Right, so that's typically what I've always gone with for most of my assignments, is always to do first initial, last name, and then what it is, and then just click create. So you'll see our artboard, what you've known as an artboard in Illustrator for in Photoshop as our canvas in the middle. As we kind of explore and get into Photoshop, you're going to see, again, a lot of things that are similar, right? Our toolbar is still on the left. We have options of colors on the left at the very bottom of the toolbar. Our canvas, like I said, is in the middle. Our options bar is up here at the top. Anytime I change a tool, we see different options presented to be able to change whatever I want for each of those types of tools. And so as we look at that, we're going to also see on the right that we have our layers panel, we have properties, adjustments. All of these panels are kind of preloaded into our standardized essentials workspace. So it'll look familiar, and hopefully that'll make you feel a bit more comfortable as you jump in for a new semester. So this is our workspace. We're going to start with it. The next thing you want to do is you want to think of whatever name you're doing, if it's your first name or your last name or your full name. How many letters are you going to need, right? So for me, I had 9 letters for Nick and Goebel, which means I needed to hunt down 9 pictures, right? So I went and I found 9 pictures of the things that I am interested in, the things that I feel like kind of define of who I am, right? If we were to look back at that, I really love coffee. I really love D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. I love Harry Potter and Hufflepuff. I love my guitar. I'm a dog dad along with my wife. I play Magic the Gathering. I went to NC State. I love Pokemon, and I love traveling. So those were the things that kind of helped me kind of create my own. The big thing I want to make sure of is when you do go to find any images in Photoshop, right? Let's say, for instance, you're doing this project, you're doing a collage project. You really want to make sure that when you go to Google and you search, right? If, for instance, I were going to Google Images and I was wanting to, not search for Google, but if I was wanting to search for Cyndaquil, right? So one of my favorite Pokemon. If I'm searching for Cyndaquil, The first thing I ever want to do with any of my images, no matter what, when I search, is I want to change the tool setting from size to any size to large. I want to make sure that my size of any photos I get back are always going to be large. And so if in Google what you realize is any of these photos now, as I look at them, right, if I hover over any of these photos, a large setting is going to yield 1,000 pixels or larger. So anything 1,000 pixels or larger is going to be more beneficial for us for everything we do in Photoshop. It's going to be higher quality. It's typically going to be crisper. It's not going to be low quality, right? So we see this is 2,000 by 1,847. It's going to be higher quality. So first things first, if I like this image and this is one that I want to use, I'm going to right click on it. I'm not just going to automatically save image as. I want to make sure to open image in a new tab first and foremost, mainly because I need to make sure this is actually an image file. So as I click, I can see, cool, it is in fact actually a large, high quality photo. It's not a low quality piece of garbage. So I can right click and then I can save image as. One of the things I want to make sure of is this is a commonality that I've seen across the web often. If this format doesn't say JPEG, if it doesn't say GIF, if it doesn't say PNG, if it says WebP image, that means it's going to try to save it as a web page, which is not a graphics format, right? So that means if I try to save this picture, it's not actually going to save a JPEG of it, right? I need that picture to be a JPEG or GIF or PNG. I need it to be some type of graphic format. So this picture as it stands is not actually going to work. So I'm going to go back for a sec, right? If this picture is something I am dedicated to, I want this picture, I can always click and drag it to do a reverse image search on Google. If that is the picture I want, we can go try to see if there are other versions of that image. If you look, we see, cool, this image exists in all three of these different sizes. Let's go ahead and look. So example, cool, this one's on Twitter. Still looks very clear, 2,000 by 2,000. Let's go ahead and open in a new tab. And let's try to see if this one will save as a JPEG. And as you see, the format is JPEG, right? So it's not gonna be the weird web page format, which is not actually going to work. So again, a lot of the images across the web that we see usually come out as generic kind of text. I think that one of the easiest ways of getting lost in all of our files is not naming our files. It doesn't have to be anything intense, right? This is Cyndaquil, this is Pokemon, so I could easily either do Cyndaquil or I could do Pokemon, right? I've got a file named Pokemon, so I'm not going to keep it as that, but I can click on Pokemon-Cyndaquil, and then I'm going to save it to my downloads folder, save it. Cool, so we see it downloaded to my downloads folder. So you'll go through, you'll find enough images first and foremost for the number of letters that you have in your name, and then we'll come back. So let's jump to it and say, cool, you've gathered all of your images, you have the number of images you need. The next thing we want to look at is we want to use the text tool, right, to start off. So I'm going to go grab my text tool down here, the T symbol on our toolbar. Once I click on the text tool, our options bar at the very top is going to change to the options of my text tool, right? And so one of the things I want to see is the type of font that I need for this project to work is a thick font, right? If you were to look at those examples of my completed nameplate, right, it needs to be a thick font that's going to display our images for each individual letter. So it can't be something thin. It can't be something like Helvetica or something just standard like Comic Sans. It needs to be thick and really, really bold. So my recommendations typically are, if we look at the standard fonts, right, we can easily find Impact, which is going to be really thick. We can go and we can find Arial Black is always a good option for being a thick font. You can also go to dafont.com, right? You probably experienced that in Graphic Design 1 last semester. If there's a font that's really, really thick and you want to use that from dafont.com, use it. I'm going to choose Arial Black. The next thing I want to change is I want to change the size of the font automatically. Photoshop, Illustrator, all of the Adobe products want to set it to 12 because 12 is a generic kind of set standard for a lot of the US. And so let's bump it up. We need that to be anywhere between 200 to 300 points. So I'm going to type in 250, somewhere in between. I'm going to hit enter. Right, so 250 points. If I click and let go, you'll see it automatically wants to fill in with the lorem ipsum filler text. I'm going to type in my first letter, G. Okay. Once I'm done typing in G, I'm going to click my move tool at the very top of my toolbar, the little arrow, kind of cross-directional arrow right there. And then I'm going to move my G down. So I can do a couple different ways of laying this out, right? I can go across, I can go down if I wanted to have kind of a unique way of doing that, or I could go diagonally across the page. It's kind of how you want to set it up. The big thing is making sure that the tactic or the technique of filling it in with the image is going to work out. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to set my G. I'm now going to go and I'm going to use my text tool again. Click elsewhere in our canvas. I'm going to type in uppercase O, do the same thing, use my move tool, kind of line it up here. So I'm going to get it a little close just because, you know, we've got B, L, and E still needing to be typed in. Use my text tool again, type in this bottom left-hand corner. Oh, look at that. That L is perfect. Well, except for here, you know, the fact that I need to have the B. So we'll move that B there. And then let's try to do the L next. So if you've noticed already, I'm going to run out of space, right? I still have one more letter I need to do. I could, of course, squeeze these letters together. But the problem that I'm going to run into is the fact that I'm still not going to have enough space. So the easiest solution, if I double click on a letter, is to bump this down. So let's go to 200. I started with 200 thinking that that would be right. So 200, hit enter. And then I'm just going to double click on each letter and change that to 200. Hit enter. Again, double click on my B, 200, enter. Double click on the L, 200, enter, cool. So now if I use my move tool, I should be able to line that up and get a little bit more space so I can actually have my E. And then I'll have a little bit more working space to be able to kind of, if I need to move around again, right? So again, use my text tool, uppercase E, boom, cool. Let's say that I want to move all of these letters together as one, right? Right now I only have the E layer selected, so you can always see what you have clicked on, what you have selected that's an active layer going on in Photoshop. If you look over at your layers panel, you'll see that it's highlighted. And so if I wanted to grab other layers here, if I hold my shift key on my keyboard, I can click on each individual letter, and you'll notice over here in the layers panel, it's highlighting as I select each of those, right? So now if I were to scroll and look, all of my letter layers are selected. Background layer is not selected. Cool. Which means now if I were to use my move tool and move it, I would be able to move all of my letters perfectly together, get them in the center, and we have it perfectly there. So here's the deal. Here's the deal. Like with this project, we need to basically be able to take the shape of the letter and then cut that shape and allow the picture to show through. Okay? And so let's start with the G. Okay? With this G, if I right click over here in this area on this G layer, I'll see this giant menu. Okay? We'll see two things. We'll see this giant menu. If I were to click off of it, if I were to accidentally right click over here inside this little kind of icon layer or icon area for the layer, if I were to right click, I'd get the small layer. We'll interact with both types of layer like lists at some point. The biggest thing I want you to see is there's a big difference between where you click. Okay, so for the purpose of starting off with trying to choose things for our letters after we set all of our letters, I want to right click in this big wide open space to the right. Okay, and so if I were to scroll down and look, this giant thing, this giant list, what I'm looking for is this thing called rasterize type. Okay, when I click on rasterize type, I want you to see what happened. So we can see that the G layer turned from what looked like an icon of T, right, for type or text, to this little kind of preview of an image of the G. So what I did when I rasterized that G was I took the editable text. I took the thing of like, cool, if I wanted this O to be a different letter, I could change it to be a J, right? Because that O layer is a text layer. Control Z or Command Z to undo that. But the G right here, I rasterized it. So I turned it into an image of that G. Notice that I didn't do that until after I had set the size of my letters, the placement, kind of how I wanted it set up so that it's the way it's going to be, right? So I can do that easily by right-clicking on any of these letters, scrolling and looking. I can see rasterized type. I'll do that for each letter, okay? So let's say you have a lot of letters, right? You have a lot more than just, these lovely 5. What you could easily do, if you look, I have these 2 left. I could click on one. If I hold shift, I could click on multiples just like I did before. And then if I right click, I can rasterize both of those layers at the same time. It'll turn both of those in. Cool. So notice again, I have each letter is its own layer. So something maybe a little bit different than what you were used to with Illustrator, where you can draw and have a lot of things on one individual layer. In Photoshop, everything you add is basically its own layer. Unless you merge it down, it's going to be its own thing. So awesome. Let's start with this G. I'm going to click on it first. I'm going to go up here to File, and I'm going to do Place Embedded. We'll talk a little bit later in the semester about the difference between place embedded and place linked. I think the biggest thing you want to see is place embedded. For this project is going to get you started off right. I'm going to click on my downloads because that's where all my pictures are. I'm going to say yes, Photoshop is allowed to go to my downloads. So let's start with, I've got 5 letters. So we'll start with my dog, Luna. Lovely little husky. We'll place it. Okay. This picture is going to be big. So when I place it, it's going to be bigger than the letter, right? We can see Luna tries to take up the entire page. She is a princess. And so I don't need it to be that big, right? But I do want her to be showing through. And so I want it to be either the same size as the letter or whatever is going to be a little bit over, a little bit under. So I want her to show through. So as I look, I want to think about where that letter is and what's going to show through in the shape of that letter for the picture itself, right? Because you have all this empty space in a lot of these letters. So what's going to show through? I think I want her eyes definitely to show through, so I'm going to move it up here. I'm going to hit enter. Notice that with Photoshop, when I place an image, it lets you edit the size. It has the transform box. You can do all of that during that time. And then I can hit enter to finalize that action. You can also see that with the little check mark up here where I can finalize and finish my action. So either enter or that check mark. So just like our letters, you'll notice that this picture has this little icon over here on the layer that has this little like page, right? I need to rasterize this layer as well. To be able to edit it, to be able to make it editable, I'm going to right click over in the wide open space again. I'm going to scroll and look. I'm going to look for rasterize layer. So again, rasterize, I want you to think of it as a way that you can edit it as a photo, a way that you can basically take something and turn it into an editable photo that's going to be edited, changed, manipulated, whatever type of wording that we want to use. So rasterize layer, that little thing goes away. So this G, notice it's underneath, right? So with Photoshop, if I drag that above, maybe possibly you wind up doing this accidentally once and you're like, where's my picture? Why is my picture underneath? In Photoshop, you can drag your layers up or down. So I want Luna, I want any picture to be above the letter I'm editing, right? So if I move it like that, I'm going to have her above the G. And I want you to look right here where the little icon is, right? So I can do one of 2 things. I can either hold Command and I can click in that little icon. Notice dancing ants pop up, basically showing you your selection of the letter. I'm going to deselect with Control or Command D for a sec to deselect so you can see this. If I were to right click on that little icon window for G, all that I did was I did a shortcut. I held down Command and I clicked there, which let me select pixels. This layer is a G. That G is in that shape of the G. And so when I select pixels, it is finding whatever picture is on that layer, and it's revealing kind of what's there. So the shape of the G is the image that's on that layer. So I like the fact that her eyes are showing through the top here. Notice her tongue's going to be missing. Her body shows through pretty well. The dog park shows through the rest. Because of the way the picture is, I think this is a pretty good representation of it. But if you need to move it, let's say you've got a picture and you're like, well, I really want this part of the picture to actually be showing. Again, Command D will deselect the dancing ants. So anytime you see dancing ants, you've made a selection. You've selected a portion of the picture. So Command D to deselect. And at that point, just move your picture, right? Click on the picture layer, so Luna, and you can click and drag it up or down and kind of reposition where that picture is going to be, right? So now I've included more of her ears. What you don't want to do is you don't want to move the picture while you have the dancing ants up, right? You want to make sure the dancing ants are going on, and if you want to make a change of the position of the picture, that you Command D to deselect your selection, okay? I like the way that looks, so I'm going to, again, make my selection of the G, right? I've made a selection. For the next portion of this, we're going to do an inverse of our selection. And if we look, we can do this in a couple different ways. We can either do select inverse, right? Because we've got a selection, those dancing ants. We can do select inverse. Or if you look at the shortcut on your keyboard, you can do Command Shift I, right? Command Shift I. And so Command Shift I would let us inverse our selection. Notice dancing ants are now going around the edge of the page as well. And so on this picture of Luna, notice I'm clicked on this picture of Luna, I'm going to hit my back or delete key on my keyboard, my backspace or my delete key. And notice that what it does is backspace or delete deletes everything around the selection of the shape. It keeps everything inside, but it deletes everything of the picture on the outside. We're going to do Command D to deselect. If you really want to go down the list, you can always do select and then deselect, but Command D is always a shorter way of doing that. Always highly recommend using shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts, or a lifesaver. So notice that Luna, this letter, this shape is on Luna's picture. It is not actually on the G. The G that's here is still here, right? I don't need that G layer. I just need the Luna layer, right? And so I can always rename a layer in Photoshop just like I could with Illustrator. If I double click on it with the name, I can rename it as G. That means I don't need my letter anymore, the original letter, since it's already been changed. So I can either hit backspace or delete, or I could just hit the little trash can icon, make that original G go away. So the idea is that you're going to do that for every single letter. At the end, you wind up with something that looks like this, right? Notice that my background is changed to black. I didn't like the way that my letters looked with a white background. I want to keep it kind of simple, so let's do it as whatever color is maybe your favorite color, or whatever feels right with the pictures you chose. Again, I have a lot of kind of reds and blues going on, so I felt like a neutral black kind of worked really, really well. But what I did, if you look for a sec, is I just clicked on my background layer. I used the color palette over here. I found a color I wanted. So let's say, for instance, for this, I really wanted, since I graduated from NC State, I'll use kind of a dark red, right? I can go and find and hunt down the color I want. We'll go with that. And if we look, again, I'm clicked on my background layer. Really important of what layer you're clicked on. If you look down at your keyboard, you'll see Alt and backspace, right? Or Option backspace. And so Alt backspace will fill with whatever is the foreground color that you've chosen. AKA I chose this red, so that is the first color I chose. Notice that it changes anytime that I move it around in the color picker. So I can always change that to something else. It doesn't matter. If you don't like the way a color looks, change it to whatever you want it to look like. I could go with blue. Whatever color goes well with your final finished project, right? The final thing I want you to make sure of is, so we have this final project, right? Again, make sure that, for instance, each of your layers are named the letter that it is. But the next part I want you to make sure of is this. For this first project, I really want you to make sure you save and submit as a Photoshop file, which is a PSD. So in Illustrator, we had AI files. We're going to do File, and we're going to do Save As. Okay. As I do File, Save As, I'm going to look as this first menu pops up. It's going to ask, do I want to save on the computer or to Creative Cloud? I typically recommend starting off, get used to saving on your computer. So again, if you didn't name it at the beginning, that's all cool, right? You can always do N Goebel, okay, your first initial, your last name, and then lettering, right? Keep the .psd, don't delete that. I'm gonna save this to my desktop instead. And then format, it's gonna be Photoshop, right? So if you were to click that, you'd see all these different types. You don't want Photoshop PDF, you want Photoshop, just straight up Photoshop. We're not going to deal with large document format, and we're not going to deal with TIFF. So just Photoshop, leave the embed color profile as is, and then click Save. Okay. It's going to ask if I want to do that. When this menu comes up, we're doing low-level kind of Photoshop stuff right now, so we don't need to worry too much about it. When it asks if you want to maximize compatibility, just click OK. It's perfectly fine for now. It's going to go through. It's going to save. Before you close out of your final project, make sure that it is, in fact, actually there, and make sure it actually works. When you go to submit it to Moodle, just make sure that, again, you're submitting that .psd file. I know it's going to look great. I'm really excited. If you have questions, please, 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 please don't hesitate to reach out and ask me. I'm always more than happy to help in every capacity. Thank you guys so much, and I look forward to working with you this semester. I really do.